The cramped apartment, if one could even call it that, sat in the lower districts of Extinction Prime, where the ceilings were built for beings 3 times the height of an average human. Marcus Chin stood at the doorway, his neck craned upward at an uncomfortable angle as he faced his landlord. Chronix towered above him, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming purple under the dim bioluminescent strips that served as lighting in this sector. Her 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern across her angular face, fixed on him with what Marcus had learned to recognize as irritation. "So you say you can't pay your rent," Chronix said, her mandibles clicking with each syllable. The translation implant behind Marcus's ear converted her native tongue into English, though it couldn't quite capture the threatening undertone that needed no translation. "This is the third cycle, human. Even on this world, patience has limits." Marcus shifted his weight, acutely aware that his entire body mass was roughly equivalent to one of Chronix's 4 arms. "I understand, and I'm not making excuses. The work I was promised at the refinery fell through. They said my structural inadequacy made me a liability." He tried to keep the bitterness from his voice. It wasn't the first time his humanity had been used against him since he'd arrived on Exitharan Prime 6 months ago. "Structural inadequacy," Chronix repeated, her voice laden with something between amusement and disdain. "A delicate way of saying you're too small, too weak, too fragile for real work." She leaned down, bringing her face closer to his level, though it still remained a good meter above him. "Perhaps you should have stayed on your little world, human. The galaxy is not kind to the soft." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard variations of this speech from a dozen different species since leaving Earth. Humanity was the newcomer, the late arrival to a galactic community that had been established for millennia. Humans were small, relatively weak, short-lived, and possessed none of the natural advantages that made other species valuable. No armored hides, no toxic breath, no regenerative abilities, no natural weapons. Just soft skin, breakable bones, and an unfortunate tendency to die from things that other species considered minor inconveniences. "I have a proposal," Marcus said, straightening his spine and meeting her lowest set of eyes directly. "Give me one more cycle. Let me prove I can pay not just this month's rent, but next month's as well, plus a penalty fee for the trouble I've caused." Chronix's mandibles clacked in what Marcus had learned was laughter. "And how exactly do you plan to accomplish this miracle? You've been rejected from every legitimate employment opportunity in this sector. The only work left for someone of your limitations is in the Undercity, and I doubt a human would last one rotation down there." "Then give me work that doesn't depend on size or strength," Marcus replied. "I've noticed your building has a rodent problem. The SKRE that nest in your walls and eat through the power conduits." "The SKRE." Chronix's tone shifted slightly, revealing the first hint of genuine interest. "Those vermin are too small and too fast for my people to catch effectively. We've lost 3 apartments to fire because of their nesting. The exterminators want a fortune to tint the entire building, and even then, they can't guarantee success. I can get rid of them," Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. "Humans are persistence hunters. We might not be the biggest or the strongest, but we're patient, we're clever, and we don't give up. Give me access to the maintenance shafts in 3 days. If I can't eliminate the infestation, I'll leave without argument. But if I succeed, you give me 4 more cycles to get on my feet, rent-free, and we call it even." Chronix studied him for a long moment, her multiple eyes blinking in an unsynchronized pattern that Marcus found deeply unsettling. "You have confidence, I'll grant you that. Foolish confidence, perhaps, but confidence nonetheless." She reached into a pouch on her utility harness and produced a data chip. 3 days. "But know this, human. If you fail, you don't just leave. You pay me triple rent for the cycles you've missed, or I sell your contract to the mining guilds. They have use for small bodies in the deep shafts, whether those bodies last long or not." Marcus took the chip, feeling its weight in his palm like a verdict. "Understood. I won't fail." As Chronix's heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, Marcus entered his apartment and sealed the door behind him. The space was laughably oversized for him, designed for beings that could reach the ceiling without jumping. He'd fashioned his living area in one corner, using salvaged materials to create something approximating human scale. His few possessions lay scattered about: a worn datapad, some clothes, a picture of Earth he'd brought from home, and a toolkit he'd assembled piece by piece from the surplus markets. Marcus spent the next hour reviewing the building's schematics on the datapad, studying the maze of maintenance shafts, ventilation systems, and utility conduits that threaded through the structure like veins. The SKRE were small, about the size of Earth rats, but they were significantly faster and possessed a rudimentary pack intelligence that made them formidable pests. Their nests generated tremendous heat, which explained the fire risk, and they reproduced at an alarming rate. But Marcus had advantages that Chronix and her people didn't appreciate. His small size meant he could navigate spaces they couldn't. His flexible joints allowed him to contort through gaps that would stop larger species. And most importantly, he had humanity's greatest evolutionary gift, the ability to outlast, outsmart, and outplan any opponent given enough time. He began his hunt at the nexus of the maintenance system, a junction point where multiple shafts converged. The space was tight even for him, requiring him to crawl on his belly through passages barely wider than his shoulders. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of SKRE musk. His headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing scratch marks on the metal surfaces and the telltale signs of frequent passage. For the first day, Marcus simply observed. He tracked movement patterns, identified feeding routes, and located the approximate positions of 3 major nests. The SKRE were indeed fast and clever, but they were also creatures of habit. They used the same pathways, fed at consistent intervals, and always maintained escape routes from their nests that on the second day, Marcus began his campaign. He couldn't match the SKRE's speed, so he didn't try. Instead, he used materials from his toolkit to construct a series of ingenious traps and barriers. He blocked off secondary passages, forcing the creatures into more predictable routes. He created bottlenecks where their speed became a disadvantage. He used his understanding of human engineering, principles that seemed primitive to galactic standards but were novel enough to be unexpected, to design mechanisms that the SKRE couldn't detect or comprehend. But the real stroke of genius came from understanding the creature's biology. Marcus had noticed that SKRE avoided certain thermal signatures. After experimenting with different combinations of materials, he discovered that burning a specific type of insulation produced a smoke that the creatures found intolerable. It wasn't toxic, at least not to him or to the building's residents, but to the SKRE's sensitive respiratory systems, it was unbearable. Marcus spent hours carefully positioning his smoke generators at strategic points throughout the maintenance system. He timed their activation perfectly, creating a wave of uncomfortable but non-lethal smoke that pushed the SKRE exactly where he wanted them, toward the building's exterior vents, where he positioned one-way barriers that allowed exit but prevented re-entry. The third day was the longest of Marcus's life. He waited in the dark, monitoring his traps through a network of small sensors he'd improvised from spare electronics. One by one, the SKRE fled, driven by instinct to escape the irritating smoke. A few tried to circle back, only to find their usual paths blocked and their alternative routes leading inexorably outward. By the time the cycle ended, Marcus had visual confirmation that the building's SKRE population had dropped by over 90%. The remaining few were isolated stragglers that he hunted down individually, using patience and persistence to corner them in dead-end passages. When Marcus emerged from the maintenance shafts on the 4th day, he was filthy, exhausted, and sporting several cuts and bruises from navigating the tight spaces. But he was also successful. He made his way to Chronix's apartment and activated the door chime. The giant alien woman appeared, looking down at him with her 4 eyes. "You're alive," she observed. "Surprising. The SKRE are gone," Marcus said simply. "Check your sensors. No thermal signatures in the walls, no power fluctuations, no nesting activity." Chronix pulled up a holographic display from her wrist device, her eyes scanning the data. Marcus watched as her mandibles slowly clicked in what he hoped was approval. "Impossible," she muttered. "The last 3 exterminators couldn't accomplish this in twice the time with 10 times the resources. Humans are good at solving problems others consider impossible," Marcus replied. "We've had to be. We didn't evolve with armor or claws or size. We evolved with stubbornness and creativity." Chronix was silent for a long moment. Then, to Marcus's surprise, she produced another data chip. "Your 4 cycles, rent-free, as promised. But I have a different proposal. My sister owns 3 buildings in the adjacent sector. They all have similar problems: pests, system malfunctions, issues that are too small for standard contractors, but too persistent to ignore. Problems that require someone who can think differently and fit into spaces my people cannot. She extended the chip toward him. 50 credits per job, plus a permanent reduction on your rent. Consider it a contract. You solve problems for my family's properties, and we ensure you have a place in this district. A human might be small, but perhaps that's not always a disadvantage. Marcus took the chip, a genuine smile crossing his face for the first time in months. I accept. You won't regret this. See that I don't, Chronix replied, but her tone had shifted. There was a hint of respect there now, grudging but real. The galaxy may not have been kind to your species so far, human, but perhaps that's because you haven't shown us what you're truly capable of. As Marcus walked back to his apartment, he felt the weight of exhaustion mixed with something he hadn't experienced since arriving on Exotheron Prime: hope. He was still small, still weaker than most species he encountered, still a foreigner in a world not built for him. But he'd proven something important, both to Chronix and to himself. Humanity might be the newcomer, the underdog, the species that seemed disadvantaged in every measurable way. But humans had spent their entire evolutionary history turning disadvantages into advantages, finding solutions where others saw impossibilities, and persisting when anyone sensible would have given up. The galaxy was vast and filled with species that were bigger, stronger, and more naturally gifted than humans. But none of them had spent millennia learning to survive against the odds. None of them had been forced to become creative, adaptable, and relentlessly determined just to stay alive. Marcus looked up at the towering buildings around him, their architecture designed for giants. He thought about Earth, about the countless humans who were probably facing similar struggles on countless alien worlds across the galaxy. They were all pioneers, all proving that humanity deserved its place among the stars, and they were all, in their own ways, showing the galaxy what humans did best. They adapted, they persevered, and they found a way to win, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The next morning, Marcus received his first assignment from Chronix's sister: a malfunctioning environmental system in a residential tower, with access panels too small for regular maintenance crews. The pay was good, the work was challenging, and it was exactly the kind of problem that played to human strengths. As he gathered his tools and prepared to head out, Marcus caught his reflection in a polished surface. He was still small, still unremarkable by galactic standards. But he was also employed, hopeful, and ready to show this sector, and eventually, the galaxy, that being human was more than enough. Because in the end, it wasn't about size or strength or natural advantages. It was about refusing to quit, finding creative solutions, and proving that the most dangerous thing in the universe wasn't claws or fangs or armor, that it was a human who had something to prove.